looking at our ecosystem, if you want to turn the page over to that Ewok, it's so funny, like when these stories develop, and obviously everybody's talking about, EHEX, is EHEX dead? What did he mean by this? Things happen and in crypto at breakneck speed. And it's like you completely forget something that just went on right before that. Because I have here in my notes talking about the prices, because we started making these last week, that we had a big pump in this ecosystem going into the weekend. I forgot about that already, literally. And that PulseX primarily pumped by a big wallet that had some affiliation with the Sacrifice wallets. And it actually went up to SAC rate. So we saw PulseX on a wick anyway. I mean, it was pumping hardcore, I believe, last Thursday night, because I remember DMing with you, maybe Friday. But PulseX just absolutely killed it. Got a hard reject right there at SAC rate, which is the 3 zeros and a 1, and came back down, which was pretty interesting. I'll just shout out all the prices real quick. I forgot to do that first. But yeah, we have Pulse right now at 3 zeros, 1 7. We're actually on a little wee bit of a pump right now as we get on stream, which is not usual for newcomers. So we have that going on. PulseX right now sits at about 15% below SAC rate. So still very healthy, running harder than like everything every single time we get a pump. Incentive token, Jesus Christ, almost $9 right now, which is just nuts. And a story we're going to get to here in a moment, but the combined hexes, which nobody wants to quote anymore, are at like 2.3 cents. That's right. It's lower than it's been in quite some time. So money has left Hex entirely, not just eHex to go to Hex. Money has left Hex to go into the other portions of this ecosystem right now. So, but we do have Hex, the Hex, at 1.8 cents right now, and eHex has rallied off the low anyway, which I figured would happen by now. I do not think it's going to go lower than it has this bear market, but we'll get to that in a moment. But it's at about just under half a penny, basically. So, anyway, so that's where we are with everything. But yeah, which chart did you have up? I'm sorry for backtracking there.
I did have the PulseX pulled up because
okay,
you were talking about that pump that was on the 8th, whatever day that was, 4 days ago.
Yeah.
I think it was Friday, wasn't it?
Yeah, Thursday or Friday, I knew. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Friday.
But it was insane. It was like every time I checked. Now, if you wanted to ask me how many times I checked my portfolio that day, it was pretty awesome. But I was mainly looking at PulseX, just flying up there and just relentlessly every time. I remember you and me were DMing and just refreshing and like, Jesus, look at this thing. And it gets rejected at the SAC rate. So a couple questions here. What do you make of the chart right now? Looks pretty goddamn good to me. But also, what do you make of this wallet that had an association with one of the Sacrifice wallets? Just injecting into PulseX right now instead of anything else. Yeah, what do you make of all that?
Well, I think it's going to kind of take turns injecting just to maybe get some ratios where that entity thinks maybe they should be. I don't know that there's a favorite. I wouldn't say that because we've seen it happen with incentive too, right? I think the last round was with incentive. So all the money got injected there and it just pulls everything else with it. So, just because the money's coming into one thing doesn't mean the other ones aren't going to rise. Everything's so tied together by liquidity bonding that it really doesn't matter. I think this recent one though to PulseX was possibly to expedite some weekends, knowing that there would probably be a lot of selling at that sacrifice level of 0.0001. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And we haven't seen anything since. So, that entity, while it wants the price to be up there, it doesn't want to be exit liquidity either, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to spend millions of dollars just so people can get out. So, you have to do that in a very strategic yet subtle way. I mean, obviously it wasn't very subtle. I mean,
it was pretty hard. It was pretty noticeable.
Right.
It was a hard injection. It was a real hard injection. Yeah.
It was. And very quick too. I mean, it didn't last long, but I think the goal of that was to possibly get out some hands that needed to be rinsed and kind of see what happens after that. Does the community kind of rally behind it and start buying? It didn't look like it. It just kind of looked like it fizzled. So there's a lot to be said for that as well. People just are kind of waiting. And I hope that doesn't happen. I hope they're not just waiting for one entity to buy. We have to have some onboarding as well, or it's just going to be short lived. Every pump, there's going to be a massive dump. It just doesn't. It's not sustainable that way. So.
Well, it's not going to happen that way. And I mean, it's one of those chicken and the egg things that we've talked about before, where it's like, yeah, people want an entity to prove itself to get into the market, but also, green candles bring people to the market. So, yeah, it's kind of one of those chicken and the egg things. But luckily, like you just said, I mean, we didn't really see a massive sell off after this at all yet. I mean, PulseX has still held up pretty damn strongly. It was on Saturday that it dipped below that 8 number there anyway for just a tad. But I mean, it's been up over here again for a while. So yeah, you got a DJ Moon Boy. But yeah, I mean, it's just looking really healthy right now. And we saw that ratio of Pulse to PulseX get the whole way down to 2 to 1, or 1 to 2, however you would want to say it. Which is just nuts. I mean, it's, this is something that's oscillated between 2 and
3.
I was gonna say 4, but that was more so like back at launch time.
Early days.
Yeah. We've basically been between like 2.4 to 3 or so for quite a while. So, and we, you can monitor that. We monitored it, I think, even more doing the yield farming on the 2 tokens, because you want to kind of know that. But yeah, this is the most that PulseX has run up on a Pulse in quite some time. So I think that's probably due for I think that's about the top probably. I can't imagine people have talked about like PulseX hitting parity with it. I can't foresee that. I think this is probably more the top of its range in terms of ratios, but it is cool to see PulseX pumping so hard. And God, I mean, when things really start to rip, I mean, we've all talked about it. PulseX is probably going to be the thing, maybe Inc too, that just runs like hell in this bull market. So
could very well.
Yeah.
I don't see that. I don't see that ratio getting too far out of whack. You have to remember there were 3 times the amount of sacrificers that got into PulseX, and I believe it was at least 2.5 to 3 times the amount of capital raised as well. So I mean that says a lot for how they should play out and how they should kind of even at. So